I'd like to thank you all for coming here tonight and for having us here in the beautiful city of Ghent. I must apologise for my English, but my Dutch is even worse. I believe tonight that we will hear about the legal aspects of self-determination. We will also hear about self-determination within a European context. And I would like to focus upon the philosophical aspects of self-determination and the societal perspectives of self-determination. Now, the other evening, I was thinking about self-determination, and I stopped for a moment to take my 9-year-old daughter to bed, and she said to me, "Can I have a piece of paper?" So I asked her, "Well, why?" And she replied, "Because I'm going to write your speech for you." And I said, "But what do you know about self-determination?" And she said, with very little thought, "Well, it's you wanting something." So here's the speech that she wrote for me. No, but seriously, take a moment to think about what it means to you. Is it simply a political or a legal concept? Or is it something more personal, something more fundamental? Now, both Plato and Aristotle explored these ideas, and they came to the belief that self-determination equates to positive freedom, where we can be the authors of our own actions and our own destiny. Now, these ideas developed, and they recognized that for people to express self-determination, they could only do so when not constrained physically or mentally. And this is mirrored in political self-determination. If we consider that the constraint applied is by an external power that limits our freedoms to take our own choices. Now, philosophically, these freedoms are generally expressed as autonomies. And in their purest sense, they are, as they refer to an individual's capacity for self-determination or self-governance. Now, of course, as we know, in the modern political age, as many of us here today know, autonomy does not always reflect these freedoms. And I thought that with all the people here today, I would have a joke to say about autonomy. But when I Googled self-determination, for once it came up with no search results found for self-determination humour. Now, these autonomies, though, they are closely linked to the concept of moral autonomy, something that was developed by Kant, but was also essential in both Plato and Aristotle's thinking. It was our ability to become self-aware and subsequently self-determinate. And according to Aristotle, each person has an obligation to achieve, to become, and to make something of themselves by pursuing their true ends and goals in life. But why, we may think, is it important to develop an understanding of the philosophy of self-determination when we think about it in a political context? Well, it's important to be able to reflect and understand how our own self-awareness develops and subsequently how it affects the way in which we make individual choices and then in turn those affect others. In many cases, this can begin initially as a subconscious desire or an aspiration that is expressed consciously as an action, one that has been determined by the self, the person, and in turn this develops into an idea which we explain to others, and they may also wish to adopt that idea as part of their values, beliefs, and aspirations. And as this initial process grows and develops, it becomes the foundations of our societies. how we live our life, how we treat one another, and how we wish to be. We create a collective sense of self-determination. And this collective sense of self-determination can only happen through individual self-determination. Therefore, we first need to nurture our own personal self-determination, our own sense of what we want to do, what we want to achieve, and how we wish society to reflect this. Before we can transmit this to others, we create a chain reaction, which then leads to a national, collective sense of what we want our society to be and how this can be achieved. It's clear that throughout history, events which have had profound effect on our thinking, be it revolution, democracy, concepts of equality, and fundamental human rights, did not just appear. They developed over time, little by little, starting with one and growing to many. Many of these concepts transcend the notion of nation. They've become truly global, embedded in what we see are universal rights and values, which we wish to see achieved across the world. But they all began in the same way. They began with an individual expression, which then encompassed the society, the nation, and beyond. Now, the right to political self-determination in modern times is perhaps easier to explain than the development of other rights, as on many occasions they were preceded by major events. Firstly, the American Revolution has been widely seen as one of the first modern demonstrations of political self-determination, as it invoked the fundamental rights of the people and the idea that the people's will was supreme. This idea was further recognised in the Declaration of Independence, which contained the well-known words, "All are created equal with certain unalienable rights, such as liberty." The effect of the American Declaration of Independence was significant internationally. It created a feeling amongst civic movements in Europe, such as France, where having grown tired of the inequality and poverty that many people were living in, collectively they decided that things had to change and that people had to become the authors of their own futures. Of course, as we know, this desire for change led to the French Revolution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This sense of rights of the people governing themselves has continued to grow, and with the advent of both world wars, eventually became part of international law, and as we'll hear, was incorporated into the articles of the UN, namely chiefly saying that all people have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. But the problem arises because even though we may believe that the right to self-determination is a fundamental one, and one that is legitimised by international law, it's apparent that it's not being applied. So how can we achieve self-determination if our rights are being denied? We will not achieve it by philosophising about it or by simply declaring that it is a fundamental right. We must understand it in a practical sense too. To give you an example, Scotland has begun this journey. Scotland has begun the journey to a state of national self-determination. Not too long ago in Scotland, it was difficult, if not impossible, to have a conversation about the future of our country, about what it meant to us. If you did, you were generally met with the response of, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that," or "Oh, don't be serious," or "Oh, have another whiskey." Well, maybe that's my friends anyway. And it made me wonder, why was this the case? But then I'd have another drink, and then I'd forget about what I was thinking about. So after much time, I thought, was it because Scots had been repressed by external influences? And perhaps this goes some way to explaining reluctance to express ourselves freely. But I believe it was something more, something that was more fundamental. And bizarrely enough, it was due to living in a highly individualistic society, a capitalistic society. Many people had stopped thinking about what was best for our society, and they thought more about what was best for themselves. People were encouraged at an early age to develop ideas, their values and their opinions, and to believe that these ideas were correct and not to explore them any further, for fear of being wrong or having those ideas challenged, the very opposite of what we need to create if we are to achieve self-determination. A society in which the whole thing is about exploring our ideas and opinions, about what is best for our society and reaching genuine consensus rather than having the will of others imposed on ourselves. When it became clear that Scotland was to have a referendum on its future, everything changed. You couldn't shut people up, even if you wanted to. They had their ideas, they had their opinions on what a future Scotland meant, and they wanted to talk about them with one another. We are experiencing in Scotland a societal change, and regardless of the outcome of this year's referendum, our society will never be the same. People have been empowered in Scotland. They've been given the opportunity to explore what they value and what kind of society they want to live in. And after September, they will continue to develop these ideas. We have found a voice, and this is one of the greatest successes of self-determination. And we have created a culture of self-determination. And whilst this culture may not change Scotland overnight, may not eradicate inequality or poverty, it can begin to address these issues. And this is something that is hugely powerful. In conclusion, whilst many people may express the concept of self-determination in terms of rights or legality alone, although I do agree that they are hugely important, I also believe it is more fundamental. It is something that we must first realise as individuals. And rather than only theorise over it, we must express it, and we must express what it means to us, so that others may also express what it means to them. Only then will we see self-determination transform from the individual to the collective to society and real political change. If we want that, then we need to start this process individually. But we must also remember it's not about telling people what they should do, it is about empowering people to be able to decide. Thank you.